Namaste everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. I hope you're doing all right. At the time of our recording this podcast about 22 years ago, Indians were riveted to the TV screen. If you grew up in the 90s, like me and a few others, you could not escape the Sachin madness. Because Sachin Tendulkar isn't just a cricketer, he's an emotion. On Sachin's birthday today, we thought it fit to honor the great man. And so we have a stellar lineup of speakers talking about Tendulkar and his legacy and things to that effect. So first up, we have our resident guest extraordinaire, as I've called him before, Aashish Chandorkar, a man for all seasons. Aashish loves his poha as much as he loves his public policy and cricket. He's also one of the two people on the podcast who has met Sachin in person. Hi, Aashish.
Hi, Carrie. I think I would still rate poha a little higher than Sachin, but
Slightly
almost there.
Yeah. So perhaps also because Sachin has stopped playing, but you can still sample your poha, right?
Correct.
So next up we have Srivatsa Subbanna, or Vatsa as we like to call him. He's an IT industry veteran, and like IT industry veterans, also a very good, also a very keen cricket fan, because that's what they do, really check ESPN Cricinfo until it got banned by all the admins. Right, Vatsa?
Yeah, sure.
And also, he's big on big data and analytics and things to that effect. So, really, really keen on trivia associated with cricket and Sachin as well. So good to have you on board, Vatsa. And then finally, making his debut, we have Abhishek Paul, who is a chartered accountant and a cricket fan. Also has a way with numbers, so which is kind of the combo that gets you through at least 1/3 of a college quiz, right? Hi, Abhishek. How are you?
Hey, Carrie. Hey, everyone. I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. Thank you. So, guys, very good to have you all on this special episode. Let me begin with, a short answer around the table. Aashish, will begin with you. What is your favorite trivia about Sachin?
So, a lot of people know that in Sachin's first test, 4 cricketers made their test debut. 3 others as well. And most people remember that Waqar Younis was one of them. Some of them also remember that Salil Ankola was a third one. But the fourth name, which is generally not very commonly recalled, as Shahid Saeed. So he was a fast bowler from Pakistan who also played that test and a few other games, but then faded soon after. But I guess his entire career can be summarized with the fact that he debuted alongside Tendulkar and Waqar Younis.
Fantastic. Off to a rocking start, as Ravi sir would say. So Vatsa, you want to go next? What is your favorite trivia about Sachin? Maybe, get the others to guess the answer as well.
Sure. So this is a story from 1996. An English bowler was making his test debut, and he went and complained to the umpire that Sachin Tendulkar's bat is broader than what is allowed legally. And Sachin responded to him saying that your bowling is not that great. I can hit you for boundaries even if I played with a stump. So anyone wants to guess who the bowler is?
I think it's Mulali.
Oh, right on cue.
Alan Mulali?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, interesting. Off to on to Abhishek now. Abhishek, you want to take a stab at the trivia?
Sure. So I'll just share another story, and this is a story which we kind of got to hear from our elders. So this is in his first series versus Pakistan when he was making his debut, and so the story goes that India's batting, and Tendulkar gets hit on the nose from a ball by Waqar Younis, and blood, etc., comes out. And Navjot Singh Sidhu is the non-striker, and despite everyone's concerns, Tendulkar, continues to bat and says "Main khelega" in his squeaky voice. The story has been told a million times now. So I firmly believe that this incident and story inspired a generation of kids to continue batting despite getting hit on their noses while playing, even if it was by a tennis ball. and even if their mothers were asking them to come back to the pavilion. So, so as a trivia, do you know which was the venue where this happened? Anyone?
Karachi.
Gujranwala.
You're quite close, but I think it was at Sialkot.
Interesting. I've heard that very same story narrated by Sidhu, actually.
Absolutely.
I
He
think,
definitely makes it a point to
yeah,
mention
there's a
it.
video on YouTube on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, so fantastic. So that actually nicely lends itself to the first question that I want to kind of point to the guys, which is that Sachin is a metaphor for so many other things, right? Growing up in the 90s or 80s, as Ashish did, right? So India was just opening up. The onset of globalization, whatever, our aspirations were just starting to, open up and peak as well, right? So, Ashish, Sachin, to you, what does he mean, right? What does he mean to the common Indian? What is the larger significance that you see with Sachin?
Gary, actually, I wrote pretty much the same thing around the time when Sachin retired in one of the articles which I had then published. See, if you go back to the time when he debuted in 1989, see, India lacked heroes in general, right? So, if you look at, what were the pastimes of the country then? Politics, cricket, and Bollywood. Now, in politics, um, actually that decade was a decade of a lot of unraveling of the Delhi politics. Heroes came and went. People were generally disappointed with what was going on in the country around late 80s and early 90s. If you look at Bollywood, Amitabh, who was the reigning DT of Bollywood, his popularity was on the wane, although he was still giving a few hit movies, but the kind of craze which used to be there wasn't there. And when you look at cricket, Gavaskar had retired in '87, and Kapil Dev was also on his decline. People were saying that he's continuing to play because he wanted to take his 400th wicket and so on. So there weren't that many heroes in the country by the time Sachin started playing, or at least came to the public imagination. So he was lapped up pretty much instantaneously. If you really look his first few performances, uh, they were fairly patchy in the sense that it wasn't like natural induction for him as a great player on the international scene. I think he scored 2 ducks in the first couple of ODIs he played, and then I think his Test career also was a little slow to start off. But everyone was looking forward to him, and what I feel is that in 1990s. He really represented. If you look at 91, then India opened up, liberalization happened. This was, by the way, pre-services industry boom, right? So India was fairly landlocked and not much global exposure culturally or economically. So people used to be generally, there was this white man's burden. People used to be in awe of cricketers or from Australia and England and so on. And of course, Pakistan used to be our nemesis. And there was really no one to look at in cricketing world, at least, who could take on the mighty opponents with a lot of swagger and a lot of assertiveness. And with the general decline of the society and culture and no icons to look at, Tendulkar really started being. He kind of embodied the aspiration of the young folks who grew in that decade, and of course the first generation which benefited from the world opening up and so on. So I think Sachin and that generation essentially peaked in their lives and in their careers together. I think that was a very personal association, and I think that's what kind of separates him from the rest of the crowd. I don't think there'll be any other Sachin Tendulkar as a cricketer or as a person that you would be able to relate to as much as we did with him.
Carrie, if I can just add on to that, 80s, and I started watching cricket in the second half of the 80s. So after, India won the World Cup and all, we weren't doing that great in cricket. And we were regularly being beaten by the top teams, whether it was Pakistan, Australia at that time. And at one point, any match against Pakistan was a given that we would lose, whether it was in India or in a neutral venue, or even in Pakistan, right? So coming from that, when Sachin Tendulkar came in, even in his first match, even though it was not an official ODI, with his attacking cricket and with the way he just took on the Pakistani bowlers, it kind of gave a belief, I think, to a lot of people who were just starting off with cricket then, that as Indians we could play aggressive cricket. Till then, if you looked at all the Indian batsmen who had come in, uh, yes, some of them were very very good, but they were seen as more of artists than someone who would come in, stamp their authority on a cricket pitch, and take on the bowlers. To me, that's what Sachin means to me. He heralds the rise of the aggressive Indian batsman and aggressive Indian cricketer in general.
I think that's a fantastic point because I think we were used to being sort of meek and defensive, and the fact that you had someone who could take on the bowling no matter what kind of attack that was, right? As I keep coming back to it, it's a metaphor for so many other things, right? Abhishek, you want to add to that?
Sure, Carrie. So, there are various ways in which, we can think about this, but from a fan point of view, Tendulkar's cricketing journey is kind of something people of my generation got to see almost in the totality, right? And so, speaking for myself, I almost do not have any conscious memories of anything in a pre-Tendulkar age, right? So, we were fortunate to kind of see his entire journey, and uh, just a thought of in terms of collective ownership, right? So Tendulkar is like a hero or an icon for the entire country, and as a fan, you felt that you were sort of collectively owning, Tendulkar while going along in his journey, right? So his failures in a particular match felt like a personal failure, which you also shared with everyone, right? And his successes, culminating in, let's say, the World Cup 2011. It was like a sense of satisfaction like no other, right? That you would get when you see Tendulkar, who's sort of toiled for 20 or 24 years, to finally achieve his success. So I would say that as a fan, the amount of uh, people who got as fans, the amount of people who got invested in Tendulkar really personally, deeply, and totally followed his journey from end to end. That's something unique, and that kind of investment in a cricketer or any icon, I would say, would be almost impossible to foresee in the future.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that you make, right? We saw the full arc of Tendulkar, so to speak, right? The rise of this, of this genius of a person, and then the fall, and then the rise again, and then an exit, then a very graceful exit as well. So, yeah, so let's get down to the heavy duty stuff now, okay? Ashish, why don't you take us through your favorite knock of Sachin Tendulkar? Talk about the ODI and the test knock that you hold in highest regard.
Sure. So, of course, he has played so many wonderful innings, but on the ODI side, the 98 he made against Pakistan in 2003 at Centurion in the World Cup, that remains my favorite ODI knock. In that game, again, to carry on from what Vatsa was saying, right? See, Indians used to dread the Pakistani fast bowling, and there was always this block in your mind that Indians would always be destroyed by Pakistan fast bowling, despite the fact that we had won against Pakistan in the World Cups in the past. But some of them was like in '96 we won because Jadeja had this brilliant day, and then Prasad got Amir Sohail out, etc. So there was a little bit of a luck involved also. But I think in 2003, in that game where it was at, I think, the 10th ball of the match, where he played an uppercut to Shoaib Akhtar, which went for a 6. I think that was a very audacious shot, and for a lot of people who had watched Pakistan in awe, especially against India growing up in 80s and later in 90s, I think that one shot really turned the tide in terms of how you thought about Pakistan as an opponent. And if you see even later on after that, India has had fairly evenly matched record in Pakistan or against Pakistan in the little cricket which we have played against them. And I mean that inning I can recall. I mean that over itself from Shoaib Akhtar after he scored a six, the uppercut, then he followed it up with a flick of the middle stump which went for a four, and then he played like a on drive which went for another boundary. There was another shot of Akram, I think in the ninth over, where I think India was 65 or something like that, and then he played a shot on through the covers for a boundary. I think some of the shots which Sachin played in that innings were exquisite, and the impact which it had on the tournament, of course. I mean, India had more or less qualified, but there was some mathematical chance that we would have got kicked out. But it was still a psychologically a very important win against Pakistan, very comprehensively done. On the Test side, the inning. I mean, this is actually probably an innings which a lot of people will not pick as their favorites. Probably a lesser recalled innings, but the innings which he played in Cape Town in 2011, this was he made 146, where we won the game and then we drew the series. See, Sachin was written off as a player around 2004, 2005. There was a lot of criticism that he can't come back and his career is over. He did come back in 2008, and then he had a second wind. I mean, the run which he had from 2008 till 2011 World Cup was phenomenal. I think it actually matched his best, the one which was in 90s. And one of the innings it was the South African tour. He had scored a century in the first Test match, also which we had, which we had. I don't remember if he won or lost the Test match, but he had scored a century before this one. And then we lost the Durban Test where Steyn got him out a couple of times. And in the third Test, he really played a brilliant innings around. I mean, he batted around all players and then anchored innings very well. And batting against Steyn and Morkel and a couple of other bowlers, he was very guarded in his approach, very cautious, and Steyn bowled some fantastic spells. So the battle between the bat and the ball was just exquisite to watch in that particular innings, and I remember it again very, very vividly.
Okay, Vatsa, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. When I look at most of Sachin's career, Australia was the preeminent team, right? Whether it was one days or tests, they won 3 World Cups in a row. They were in 4 World Cup finals in a row. They won home and away against almost every side when it came to Test matches. So I'll pick both the innings from Test matches against Australia. In the ODIs, I think I would pick the final. So you started off with the Desert Storm innings, and I think he played an equally fantastic innings 3 days later in the final, which won India a trophy, right? And it was played on a fairly difficult pitch. If you looked at the other Indian batsmen, they weren't scoring as quickly as Sachin did in that innings. The fluency, whether it was the lofted drives or the cover drives, and to do it, back to back, literally 2 days away, apart from each other, was really fantastic. Right? When it comes to tests, I think a lot of Sachin's test innings at home are not rated as highly as some of the other cricketers, right? So if an Australian played a really good innings in Australia, it's always rated very highly. Whereas an Indian playing an excellent innings in India it's very rarely accorded the same level of respect. The only exception would probably be VVS Lakshman's 281, right? Which features in any sort of top innings list. So I'll go back again to 98, the start of the series, third day, or was it the 4th day? The Test match was very interestingly poised. India was 30 runs ahead of Australia in the second innings. We had lost 2 wickets, and the game was on knife's edge. Okay, and Shane Warne had come in to bowl. Shane Warne had gotten Sachin Tendulkar out in the first innings, right? And he was bowling in Chennai, which is known to favor spinners. And he came, as soon as Sachin came in, he started bowling round the wicket into the rough. And that's where the aggressive Sachin Tendulkar came out and he counter attacked. And I have not seen Shane Warne counter attack as wonderfully as he was in that innings. And India, won that test match fairly comfortably. But that innings was what changed the game for India. Without that innings, it would have been a very close game. I think we might even have lost it if Sachin had failed in that inning.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Desert Storm inning was kind of like the peak of Sachin madness, right? I remember two things about that. One is him absolutely, butchering Damian Fleming, Michael Kasparowicz, and Shane Warne. And the other, I mean, who can forget Tony Greig's commentary on that, right? They're dancing in the aisles in Sharjah. So those are, I would probably rate that among the top 10 memories I have of the 90s, really. Abhishek, you there?
Yep.
Yeah. Your favorite ODI and Test?
So the problem with going last is some of your favorites already get spoken about. So the 98 one which Vatsa talked about is definitely one of my favorite. The test one, I meant. So coming back to the ODIs, I'll rate one which I was privileged enough to watch live in the stadium. And that is the 100 he made against England in the 2011 World Cup at Bangalore, Chinnaswamy. Now this match, the amazing thing about this match was, the whole atmosphere. So India was playing its first home game in a World Cup after 96 and the debacle at Eden, right? So we had played one match versus Bangladesh at Dhaka to kick off the campaign, and then we came to Bangalore, right, for the second match for India in that tournament. And the the whole atmosphere, starting off with the national anthems, and then to get the privilege of seeing Sehwag and Sachin walk out to bat, it's just another different. Whole different feeling, right? And Tendulkar batted beautifully that day. He kind of started slowly. The others like Sehwag and then Gambhir got going, but then gradually, as time went on in the innings, Tendulkar opened up. He hit a few sixes of Graham Swan, and then by the end, he was sort of picking his gaps, and each shot was perfectly played. So that's one of my favorite innings, especially as I got to see it live. The match also turned out to be very, very exciting. It ended in a tie, right? So it's one of the best World Cup matches as well. Coming to the test, right? So so I'll just briefly talk about a couple of matches, right? So 2001, right? When the match after the whole drama at Eden Gardens, right? So where Dravid, Lakshman, and then Harbhajan Singh and Tendulkar, the bowler, earned us a victory. India once again came to Chennai for the third deciding match of that series. And there as well, facing a total of about 500 plus from Australia. The first innings, India could not afford to, give away a big lead. And Tendulkar again batted really well, scored a century, showed great mastery on what was becoming an increasingly difficult track to bat on, as the second innings would prove. And he had a great partnership with Dravid as well. So all in all, I think that's really good innings in a clutch situation. That's something to really remember. And Tendulkar's favorite ground, at least in terms of Test cricket, is definitely Chepauk, I think. And the other one to mention is, of course, the one against England, where we sort of chased almost 400 runs, just under 400 runs to win in the fourth innings. And this was the match right after, the Mumbai attacks, right? And the country was sort of going through a pretty bad time, and the whole Indian win in that match, chasing such a monumental total, and then Tendulkar seeing India home along with Yuvraj. It was a really sort of cathartic experience for a lot of folks, right? So I would mention that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So, which one of you guys want to talk about any first-class innings of Sachin that you would rank among the best?
I'll come in there, Carrie. So this was also against Australia again in '98. Probably the best phase
But
of
sir,
his.
you have a serious beef against Australians, man.
Oh, they were the best cricket team, so any performance against them counts as double.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we again, like Abhishek, uh, I was lucky enough to watch, what was Sachin Tendulkar's first class double hundred at Brabon. Uh, this was again, it was a 3 day match, and Mumbai won that match within 3 days against Australia. Scored more than 400 runs in a day, and Tendulkar scored half of them. I still remember that Shane Warne was bowling in that match, and he went for more than 100 runs in something like 15 overs. So every bowler was attacked, taken to the cleaners, and this was, almost the Australian full Test side. The only person who was not playing that day was Steve Waugh. And there's one thing I saw that day, which I think I've never seen in Mark Taylor's captaincy, and he was one of the best Test captains ever. He actually removed a slip, when Shane Warne was bowling. I have never seen that, in all my years of watching cricket, that Shane Warne has bowled in a Test match without a slip. So, and in some ways, it kind of set the tone, for the entire Test series that came after that whole display of aggressive batting.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, let's move on to some contentious stuff now, right? I want to talk about who you regard as a worthy comparison, if at all, to Sachin, right? Would it be Lara? Would it be Ponting? And dare I say, would it be Kohli, right? So we're going to start with Abhishek. Abhishek, who do you think
Sure.
is a worthy competitor?
Right. So I think before we go to Lara and Ponting, a quick nod needs to be made to Vinod Kambli, right? And in the early 90s, while Tendulkar was the prodigy that everyone talked about, Kambli came on the scene along with him. And in the initial days, with a couple of double hundreds, etc., people thought, he's just as good. Of course, longevity and other things didn't really work out for Kambli, but he was
Yeah.
definitely talked about along with Tendulkar.
Not
Uh,
to not to forget the short pitch bowling as well. Huh?
yes. So, I mean, ultimately, class came out on top, right? Tendulkar's class. So, I think going ahead, of course, Brian Lara was probably the most talked about competitor for Tendulkar in the 90s. And there were n number of debates that you and I would have been part of in classrooms and office rooms, over the years, right? Uh, Again, Ricky Ponting was another superb player, and definitely in the 2000s, I would say, first decade, he was probably the preeminent batsman going around the world, right, along with Tendulkar. So yeah, I think the other one who's really a couple of people who really excelled in terms of longevity and consistency, right? The two things that Tendulkar really signifies, and they are probably Kallis and Sangakkara, right? So I'll stop here.
Okay, plenty of names doing the rounds. Ashish, you want to talk about who's a worthy competitor? Any of the names Abhishek listed?
Yeah, I think Ponting, I would say, would come the closest. I mean, of course, one thing about Australians is that they're always lucky to play with another 7, 8 match winners, right? Which I mean, in India's case, we had very good batting or we had very good bowling, but not the two together until very recently. But with that advantage which Ponting had, I think and also another thing is the Ponting career stands out as a good contrast because some of his best years were also the years when Sachin wasn't doing very well. 2003 onwards, for a few years when Sachin was kind of down and out and he had some injuries and his form was patchy, and that is when Ponting was on top. So the contrast stands out, very, very, very starkly there. But I think I mean, this, and as Abhishek said, like we've had multiple debates on in the initial years of Twitter, and of course in offices and in classrooms. But see, the thing with Sachin is he wasn't just a cricketer. Basically, I mean, the whole country was invested in him, and it was very personal when it came to Sachin. I think that no other cricketer has played with that level of crowd investment or people investment in him, and I think that is one factor which makes it very difficult to compare. I mean, the kind of pressure which Sachin had every time he walked out, that was not just cricketing pressure, which of course every cricketer will have in a given situation. And of course, because there was no other cushion to for him, I mean, he was expected to do well in every game. That probably made his life even more difficult. But just purely in terms of cricketing caliber, Ponting, and of course then Lara. The thing is, when Lara at his best was probably the best player to watch. But his consistency was always up and down. I mean, he played some fabulous innings, and then he didn't follow it up as rigorously. But I think watching Ponting at his peak, and especially his pulls and the disdain with which he batted, was certainly worthy of a world champion.
Yeah, I mean, so since you mentioned it, right, one of the most hilarious videos I've seen is of that video of Sangakkara sledging Sean Pollock, right? And he's saying something to the effect of, "Oh, the weight of the fans and expectations, lads," or something to that effect, right? And I'm thinking, this is Sean Pollock, right? How many people in South Africa? 50 million or whatever? I mean, think about Sachin, man. I mean, a billion plus people, what that would have meant, right? Insane. So, any vote for Kohli at all?
So even though I'm probably one of the biggest Sachin fans, I think Kohli has surpassed Tendulkar when it comes to white ball batting. What he's done is he's got all the qualities that Tendulkar has, which is he goes after the bowlers, he attacks them, he makes his presence felt when he's batting, but the way he does it in such a risk-free manner. On most days, it appears that Kohli is playing risk-free cricket, and for someone in the current generation to play as many classical shots, very rarely do you see him, hit the ball in the air, and when he hits it in the air, it doesn't appear that he's taking a risk, right? So when it comes to white ball cricket, I think Kohli has kind of surpassed him, and when he ends his career, he will probably be rated, higher than Sachin by not just me, by others as well. I think when it comes to tests, Kohli is still not there. While he's had one good series in England, the last series he played well, and he's done well in Australia, but there's something fundamentally that has changed in Test cricket since somewhere 2007, 8, that time frame, right? Which is that drop-in pitches have come in Australia and New Zealand, which means that when you visited Australia, you had different kinds of pitches. So Brisbane was about handling the swing and the bounce. Perth, bounciest pitch in the world. Sydney would turn, and so on. And Melbourne being Melbourne, just the atmosphere itself is a challenge for anyone to walk into. But with drop-in pitches coming in both Australia and to a large extent even in New Zealand, that challenge has come down a bit. And the other thing is we don't play as much Test cricket now as we used to, and a lot of very, very good bowlers, they tend to retire early from Test cricket, so that they can extend their white ball career, play on in IPL and so on. So to that extent, I think I would rate Sachin higher on Test, but I think Kohli has surpassed him on Test. Coming back to one small point that Ashish had mentioned on emotional investment, right? This is like another bit of trivia that I had read, where a train was stopped at a station because Sachin Tendulkar was batting, and everyone was kind of somewhere near that station master's cabin, looking to watch him bat. And it was only when he got out that the train moved away from the station. And I don't think there has been a cricketer or a sportsman in any other sport for whom there has been that level of attachment.
Carry just one interesting point here. Much before Tendulkar became the worthy successor to Gavaskar and in 90s and early 90s, actually he was not the first choice for a lot of cricket fans then. The first name used to be Sanjay Manjrekar. Manjrekar actually debuted before Sachin. He toured West Indies in 87, 88 season. He actually played a few very good knocks, like some very difficult batting conditions, obviously, and he played the fast bowling very grittily. And then, of course, in Sachin's debut series against Pakistan, it was actually Manjrekar's best series ever. He had fairly good. Uh, I mean, there was a double hundred in Lahore and a few other good knocks. So that series was actually known for Manjrekar, and it was kind of ironic that he lost out so fast. I mean, even once he went to England in '90 and New Zealand in the same year, that's when he started getting exposed. And from there on, he played for another 6 years, but his career was on a downhill. So a lot of people in the current generation may not appreciate this, especially because they remember Manjrekar as a commentator and not as a cricketer. But actually, Manjrekar used to be the first choice for a lot of people, especially the Mumbai cricket watchers, and they used to rank him ahead of Tendulkar. Of course, that was not to be.
Okay, some trivia for you guys. Do you guys remember what was the album Manjrekar put out? I think it was in the 90s only.
Yeah, I think it was called Rest Day.
Oh, okay. We have some serious cricket fans on the podcast. So moving on, right? So let's talk about Sachin's legacy. Ashish, you have met him before as well, right? What do you think Sachin's legacy is going to be?
It's quite interesting, right? See, in public life, you expect your icons to leave a legacy of a certain variety, and there's always this expectation that this person will opine about everything what's happening in the society and will take a certain type of a stance because he's like the ideal person that you've idolized all your life, and you expect the person to behave in a certain way. Part of it is like the more recent woke culture where you have to be seen backing certain causes and certain types of thought processes, right? With Sachin, it's quite funny, right? He's always been very, very reticent. He doesn't speak. Even when he was playing on the issues which mattered, he did not speak much. And it was his actions which kind of stood out and not his words. He was heavily criticized for that also, including by some of his fans saying that he should have taken much more direct stance on some of the issues that came up, especially like match fixing and so on. I think the best part of Tendulkar is the best legacy of Tendulkar that I think which we will all carry is that a full generation will remember him only for his cricket and no other controversies, barring a few small things here and there. But when you look at an icon or an idol, you have 10-15 different types of memories, and then you have to do a netting of your memories, right? With Sachin, it will be only be cricket because he really hasn't done anything much in public life. And to me, I think while it sounds odd, that not meddling in things which he doesn't understand or he doesn't really have a strong view on will be his biggest legacy.
Yeah, I think that's one of his biggest virtues as well, right? He knew not to speak about things that one really doesn't know much about, right? As a cricketer or actor or as a public figure, let's put it that way, right? So, what's up? What do you think Sachin's legacy is going to be like?
I think Sachin's legacy is as Ashish rightly said, he will be remembered only as a cricketer. But what he will also be remembered, I think, is for a few other things. One is, I think he never lost enthusiasm for the game. So even if you look at his last few years, whether it was the way he practiced or the way he reacted to a catch or the way he reacted when he reached a milestone, he enjoyed the game as much at the end of his career and as he did at the start. Sunil Gavaskar once said that Mohammad Azharuddin, who's a fantastic batsman as well, was God's gift to Indian cricket, but Sachin Tendulkar is God's gift to cricket. And I think that is what I would remember him as. He was God's gift to a generation of cricket lovers, whether it was, the purity of technique, whether it was, the all-round skill. We've not talked about his bowling at all, but technically he can classify as a good all-rounder because, his bowling average is lower than his batting average, which is what which is how you categorize someone as a good all-rounder. And it's whether it's his catching, he's probably the second or third highest number of catches for India in tests. So it's everything about cricket, and it's about the enthusiasm, the energy with which he played the game. I think that's his legacy. There's nothing else to it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Abhishek, what do you think Sachin's legacy is?
Yeah, so I'll try to make different points to what have been already talked about, right? So a few things. So one is he's inspired an entire generation of cricketers, right, who have grown up watching him and then played along with him. And I can't think of a better example than Virender Sehwag. So when Virender Sehwag makes his test debut, I think 2001 probably, against South Africa at Bloemfontein, Tendulkar is on the other end, right? India are probably 4 or 5 down when he comes into bat. And both of them scored 100 today. And in Sehwag's game, you can see Tendulkar's impact, his inspiration, his whole game is kind of set up along the lines of the Tendulkar basics of playing hand-eye coordination, aggressive attacking instinct, the stance, the sort of grip that he has. Of course, Sehwag had his own take and twist to that, but there is a very distinct and clear Tendulkar imprint on Sehwag that you can see. And we can keep going down after that, right? So people like Kohli himself, right? Tendulkar has been a massive inspiration. Tendulkar has kind of made it such that we will never be short of good quality batsmen, because such is his legacy and impact on the Indian cricketing scene. Couple of other things. I think Tendulkar was a very key part of the team when things were down due to the whole match fixing fiasco and things like that. So along with people like Ganguly, Dravid, Kumble, etc., that core group was able to take India out of the dumps and in those dark days, right? So that is one. And finally, I would probably say that he gave us Indians a sense of national identity, right? And national identity like no other. With every other cricketer, you could sense a sort of regional favoritism amongst their fans, right? So Ganguly probably is insanely more popular in, let's say, his hometown, or any other cricketer from any other part of the country. But with Tendulkar, it was almost uniform, and the affection was as deep as it was wide, right? So that's something worth talking about. He was truly a sort of national treasure in that sense.
Okay, so 50 minutes. 50 minutes is what it takes for a Bengali to finally, when he starts talking about cricket, 50 minutes is the maximum that a Bengali can go without mentioning Dada, right? Yeah, fantastic. We held him out for that long.
Good one.
Yeah. So, by the way, Vatsa and Aashish have met Sachin, right, in person. What was that like? Vatsa, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So this happened in Bangalore. I remember the date. It was 31st August 2009. So what happened was one of my colleagues, he kind of knew someone who knew Sachin. So I just asked him, can you just call and see if we can catch up with Sachin? Since it was training before the Champions Trophy, right? That was happening in Bangalore. They did that, and a very interesting thing happened. Sachin actually called my friend. I think that's the level of humility of that person. He called him and set up a time. It was on a Sunday, so we actually went there. We got some photographs taken. I got a book signed from him. We gave him a small gift, which he initially refused to accept. Overall, I felt really good after that. Shaking hands with him and being able to talk to him. I realized later how hard it is to actually get that opportunity if you're not very well connected.
Yeah, certainly an enviable experience. Aashish, you want to talk about your story?
Yeah, I have actually met Sachin twice. The first time was in 1991,
Even more enviable experience.
and in 1991 was the first time. I'm ashamed to not remember the exact date. It was in the month of April. In those days, there used to be like a benefit match which BCCI used to organize for old cricketers for small state associations. So there was a couple 11 versus Gavaskar 11 match in Indore, and I had watched that in the stadium from a very bad corner of the ground, uncovered, etc. Like full sunlight all day. I don't think Sachin did much in the match, but when I came back home, I used to stay near Narendra Hirwani's house, and I saw a lot of cars parked there. So I took my autograph book and I cycled to Hirwani's home again. And when I reached there, a lot of cricketers were actually coming out, and I met quite a few of them, not just Sachin. Sachin was quite reluctant to sign an autograph, but he eventually did. This was 91. He was still not the biggest thing. I mean, he was of course the next big hope, but not yet fully there. I actually also met Gavaskar that day, who in 91 was my real idol, who had just retired 4 years ago. So it was a great day to have met a lot of cricketers and take their autographs. The second time was in 2013, and I remember that date very well, which was on 13th of May. There used to be a .com firm which had organized a contest to wish Sachin on his 40th birthday, and I had put in some entry and I won. So they had called 40 people from around the country to meet Sachin. And the Pune folks, although we were the closest to the venue, which was in Oberoi in Mumbai, we were late because our cab came in late and so on. But it was a blessing in disguise, because when we went there were only 5 of us. And Sachin was actually waiting. He was kept waiting to meet us because we were about to reach and so on. So it was quite funny, like what Vatsa said on the point of humility. So when we walked in, Sachin shook. I mean, actually, he approached us, all of us, and he shook our hands and said, "Hi, I am Sachin." And we didn't know what to say, like, and I just simply said, "Yes, I know," and I shook his hand, and of course, took a couple of photographs. It was quite funny. We took a group picture, and I made it a point that I stood next to him, where I have since then cropped out of the other 4 people from the picture, and it's just a picture of Sachin and me, which I've used several times on social media and on my Facebook profile. So people think it's actually just I met him personally, which wasn't the case. But great experience, like a very humble person, and his handshake is very strong. That is my memory from that day. It was just like you see the visuals of Narendra Modi's handshake, right? So our hands were red after we shook hands with Sachin.
So I have a tragic story to tell about like taking autographs, right? I remember the West Indian cricket team was touring us. I think it was the 90s, obviously early 90s or something of that sort. And you had all these towering, West Indian fast bowlers who had come to, if I remember, the Spastic Society of India or something of that sort. It was a very sweet event. I mean, they were doing some outreach and so on. And I was like super nervous and super anxious, and I finally managed to have the guts to go up to someone and ask for an autograph. But it turned out to be Ali Irani, who was the Indian team physio at that time. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would have done if it was Sachin or something. Probably would have scooted from there. So fantastic, guys. It's been lovely talking to you guys. I mean, reliving our cricket nostalgia as such. I want to end with a message from each of you to Sachin on his birthday. So Ashish.
Well, tough one. I won a contest with a message 7 years ago, but I don't know what to say at this point. He was still playing then. I guess you wish the best to Sachin. I would actually tell him that he should stay out of public focus if he's really not interested in participating in cricket administration or commentary and so on. He should just have a quiet life, which is difficult for someone like him, but that would be the best for him in terms of keeping his image intact.
Okay, what's up? Message from you?
Happy birthday, champ! And I would really like to see him, take over something like the National Cricket Academy, where he can groom our youngsters so they learn the right work ethic at a very young age. I do hope to see you in that role very soon.
Abhishek?
Sure. So, just to give a context, I was watching this program called The Test which on Amazon Prime, which sort of captures the journey of the Australian team. And one idea I really liked from that was they bring in these legends like Ponting and Steve Waugh specifically for specific tournaments to sort of mentor and guide players, but only for a short period of time. And so I would like to definitely see Sachin in that kind of a capacity with the Indian team, maybe for a World Cup or a T20 World Cup, where he could really, his ideas could really invigorate the team. And finally, as a message, happy birthday, God.
All right, there you have it. Message from each of us to Sachin. Happy birthday, Sachin. Thank you for all the wonderful memories and hope you have a blessed life ahead. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to listen to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. We're available on Anchor FM, Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and good God, I mean, a bunch of other platforms that I don't recollect right now. But do check it out on our Twitter handle. Subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends and other cricket fans, other Sachin fans if you really liked it. Until next time, please stay safe, take care of yourselves, and Jai Hind.